All right, welcome back to The Explainer. Today, we're diving straight into a deeply sobering and honestly incredibly complex piece of history. We're looking at the skies on February 21st, 1973, and the tragic interception of Libyan Arab Airlines Flight 114. We're going to break down exactly how a completely routine journey morphed into an international tragedy in a matter of minutes. It is a really stark reminder of just how high the stakes get when commercial aviation collides with strict military security. So let's get right into it. I want you to start by just thinking about this one chilling scenario. What if a passenger jet was mistaken for a bomber? Hooking into this idea is absolutely crucial to grasp the gravity of what we're about to cover. I mean, we all trust the skies to be organized, safe, heavily monitored. When you board a commercial flight, the literal last thing on your mind is being perceived as a military threat, right? But this exact scenario, this horrifying case of mistaken identity and intense security paranoia is exactly what happened here. It perfectly sets the stakes for the event we are about to unpack.
Section 1. The routine flight. Like so many major historical disasters, this one begins with absolute boring normalcy. The aircraft we're talking about was a Boeing 727, flying as Libyan Arab Airlines Flight 114. Now, the 727 is a classic. It is an unmistakable passenger airliner. We aren't talking about a military transport or some experimental craft here. This was a standard, everyday commercial jet, built to move everyday people from point A to point B. And keeping that specific aircraft in mind is super important as we move forward, because it really highlights the massive contrast between the civilian nature of this flight and the heavy military response it ended up provoking.
And the flight path? Super straightforward. They were departing from Tripoli with an expected routine arrival in Cairo. Just a standard regional hop across North Africa. For the passengers boarding in Tripoli, this was just a normal travel day. They expected to touch down safely in Cairo in a few hours, the flight plan was filed, the destination was completely clear, and for a while, everything went exactly by the book. But, as we know all too well, history usually hinges on the unexpected.
Section 2. Strayed into the Sinai. So here's where things go wrong. A simple navigational error led the Boeing 727 way off its intended course to Cairo, and it drifted right into the Sinai Desert. Now, to put this into perspective, you have to remember that in 1973, the airspace over the Sinai was incredibly sensitive. It was a total powder keg. By straying from the route because of this error, the crew of Flight 114 unintentionally flew a massive commercial airliner straight into a highly militarized, hyper-monitored zone. It wasn't an act of malice, it was just a mistake. But it was a mistake that instantly triggered a severe chain reaction from the ground.
Section 3. The phantom interception.
The absolute second that airliner crossed into the Sinai, the situation flipped from a quiet navigational mistake to a full-blown active military crisis. The response was lightning fast. Israeli F-4 Phantoms were scrambled and immediately closed in on the 727. Just imagine sitting in those passenger seats for a second. You're on a flight to Cairo, maybe you're reading, looking out the window, and out of nowhere, military fighter jets pull up right alongside your wing. Watching heavily armed interceptors close in, with nobody on board able to explain why, must have been a genuinely terrifying reality. The panic and confusion inside that cabin as those Phantoms flanked the plane is just one of the most haunting details of this whole event.
Right at this moment, you essentially have two completely conflicting realities playing out at the exact same time in the exact same airspace. On one side, you have the airliner, right? They're dealing with a civilian mistake, a profound but simple navigational error. On the flip side, you have the interceptors. They're operating under strict extreme security protocols, and they're looking at this massive, unidentified blip on their radar as an active security threat, maybe even a bomber. It's a textbook example of how a highly militarized security posture can fundamentally misinterpret a civilian accident. Two totally different mindsets just colliding in the sky.
Section 4. A fatal miscommunication. Okay, we've reached the climax of the crisis. The planes are flying side by side. The next few split-second decisions are going to dictate the lives of over 100 people. According to the historical record, the airliner didn't or couldn't respond. The intercepting pilots definitely tried to communicate, but for reasons that really highlight the frustrating ambiguity of history, that communication completely failed. Did the civilian crews simply not understand the military signals? That would be the didn't. Or was there some catastrophic technical failure preventing them from answering? That would be the couldn't. This unresolved gap in the record is the tragic hinge of the entire story. Because the passenger jet failed to communicate its harmless, civilian nature, the pilots in the F-4 Phantoms were left to make a split-second call based entirely on fear and protocol.
And the tragic outcome of that failed communication was immediate. The Phantoms opened fire on the passenger jet. Flight 114 was severely damaged, couldn't sustain flight, and crashed down into the Sinai Desert. In just a handful of minutes, a navigational error and a breakdown in communication culminated in the total destruction of a commercial Boeing 727.
Section 5. The tragic aftermath.
With the crash itself over, the immediate crisis ended, and the incredibly grim reality of the fallout began. 108. We really need to pause on that number for a second. Out of the 113 people on board that flight, 108 lost their lives. There were only 5 survivors. Behind all our analysis of flight paths and intercept protocols and radio failures, there is just the stark, devastating reality of 108 human lives lost in the desert. 108 people who simply boarded a flight to Cairo. It humanizes the statistics, doesn't it? It forces us to confront the actual human cost of this split-second military judgment.
Looking at the official post-incident fallout, Israel issued statements citing a combination of factors. They acknowledged the jet's navigational error, but at the same time, they maintained that the aircraft posed an active security threat in highly sensitive airspace, which they used to justify the interception. Subsequently, compensation was actually provided to the families of the victims. So those are the objective facts of the aftermath: an acknowledgement of the error, a defense of the military security posture, and financial restitution meant to address that monumental loss of life.
Section 6. The fragile nature of peace.
So, as we look back at the 1973 attack on Flight 114 today, what are the broader takeaways for us? Well, the controversy never fully died. Even with the official explanations, and despite the compensation paid to the families, the destruction of a civilian airliner by military jets leaves a permanent historical scar. What you should really take away from this explainer is just how terrifyingly fast a routine situation can dissolve into an absolute catastrophe. It's a stark reminder of how fragile peace truly is, and how tension, combined with one simple miscommunication, can yield irreversible, tragic results that echo for decades.
Which leaves us with a really tough question. Would you have made the same call in the cockpit? Think about those two intersecting realities we discussed earlier. If you were the fighter pilot, highly trained to protect your airspace from imminent threats, unable to get a single response from this giant, unidentified aircraft, what do? Or, on the other side, if you were in the commercial cockpit, lost, totally confused, and suddenly taking fire. It really forces us to grapple with the intense, almost impossible complexities of these split-second military decisions. Thanks so much for joining me to explore this profound moment in history. Until next time, keep questioning and keep learning.